Ernie Gibson, well known in Chelan as the Pilot, was born in Albany, Missouri to Gladys and Arthur Gibson. His father left the family, so his mother packed up Ernie and his brother J.C. and moved them to the family homestead in Munson, Canada. Later, they all moved to Centralia, Washington, where Ernie went to high school and college. While in college, he learned to fly and became an instructor. When World War II broke out, Ernie was sent to Wenatchee to train Navy pilots. Ernie trained pilots in the N-3N, a two-seat biplane. Built in 1934 by the Naval Aircraft Company, the N-3N was a very agile aircraft used to train on both floats and land. After the war, Wenatchee Air Service set up a flight training service in Chelan to train pilots on the GI Bill. Hank Harvey bought out Wenatchee Air Service and named it Chelan Airways. Ernie had worked there until the sale, and he went to Oregon, saying he was tired of students trying to take the top of his head off, a euphemism for uncoordinated aerobatics. Ernie left Chelan, but he wouldn't be gone very long. He would miss the lake and mountains as well as the people. You see, at that time, the whole lake was a community. And the Air Service would soon change from training pilots to flying passengers up and down Lake Chelan. The only transportation before the airways was the boat. Claude Southwick reflects on what boats were operating at that time.
Yeah, the Speedway was running, it was their main passenger boat at that time. The Cascade Flyer hadn't been run for several years because it was a single-engine boat and it wasn't quite as speedy as the Speedway.
The Holden mine would become the major business for the airways. In 1944, Holden Mine was well on its way to its $66 million in ore sales. The mine was the largest copper mine in Washington and a showplace for the mining industry, boasting a movie theater, bowling alley, school, and ice cream parlor. The people of Chelan and Holden traveled to each other's community to bowl, play baseball, share Christmas and Thanksgiving. Both Chelan Airways and the boat company had bowling teams. Claude Southwick recalls a baseball tournament.
Outsiders coming in on softball teams, a town team from Chelan, and go up and play against them up there. In fact, on one occasion, when we had a somewhat of an overload on the passenger boat, it was because our town team had the Speedway chartered, and they was tied over at the house on dock, and the pilot and the deckhand were both on the team, and they were up at the mine playing ball. The mine was in the process of running out of ore. The cost of operation kept going up because they were going deeper and deeper into the mountain, and they had run exploratory tunnels off, I guess, 5 or 6 miles under different mountains to see if they couldn't find an advance or another deposit of ore that they could tap into. Copper ore was a low grade of copper ore to begin with, and they were locked into one price to the government, and it was below the market value at that time, and they finally decided, well, it wasn't worth going anymore.
Just across the lake from Holden Dock was Meadow Creek Lodge, owned by the Grays. They had once sold the lodge, but had to take it back. They decided to rent to miners, so they bought a boat called the Sneak and began housing miners, transporting them daily. Claude Southwick remembers the Sneak.
John had leased it out or let somebody act like they were going to buy it, and they couldn't make a go of it, so they gave it back to John and his mother, and they went back in and decided they were going to get some of the miners to come over there and live, and he bought a boat called the Sneak. It was a former game department boat, and before the game department got it, it was a fishing boat from on the coast somewhere in saltwater. And it had an unusual name called a Sneak because it was a real quiet running boat. It had a 2-cylinder Palmer in it.
Moore Inn at Moore Point was just up lake from Meadow Creek Lodge, and mostly offered rooms to the tourists. Moore Inn was owned by John Wiley, Maury Green, and Denty Biggert. Moore Inn had been the center of attention at the time because of housing all the cast and crews for the movie The Courage of Lassie. Maury Green was a magician and entertained many guests as well as boat passengers, as Claude will recall.
Green was also an amateur magician. He loved to put on his little magic acts. And he'd do that on the boat sometimes. He'd try it out on his kids first. He'd practice his disappearing coins and all these things in front of a mirror first. And then when he thought he had it pretty well under control, he'd try it on his kids, and if he could fool them, then he knew he was ready to put it on the stage. Take it off and run long enough to overhaul it. It was getting in deplorable condition. They had it tied over on the other side of the house on dock, and on the north side of the dock behind that wing. And we were going to load it with a load of freight. Dad was actually working for Chelan Box, and they pleaded and begged with him to go back down to the boat company and run a Cascade Flyer to make a trip up the lake with a load of groceries. MGM was filming a picture up there at Moore Point, or home ported out of there, and they had, of course, the entire lodge rented for the summer. So all their supplies were taken in by boat.
One of the private cabins along the lake, the Maxwell House, was the premier showplace. Maxwell was a federal building contractor, and he built his house to the same standards. The result was a house in the middle of the wilderness with marble floors, exotic woods for doors, windows, and trim, and with an exterior of solid rock and a slate roof. By far the largest tourist center was Stehekin. The major resort was the Golden West Lodge.
They had any large group of people. Most of them stayed there at Golden West Lodge. Stehekin River Resort had cabins, of course, and Randy and Francis Morris run that. And they had a little grocery store over there that their dad, Fran Morris's dad, or Randy Morris's dad, excuse me, kind of run the store in the summertime. Most of the time, they had various ones over the years, but he was in there. He kind of retired from his orchard, and we hauled some of his apples. The last 2 years that he hauled apples, I was on the barge in the fall when we hauled them, and the next to last year he got about 3,000 boxes. Because the apples are getting pretty small, the packing sheds that were buying them said you're going to have to ring them next year. And he put the rings on them on your hand, and as you reach up, if the apple went through the ring, you just picked it and threw it on the ground. You didn't put it in a box. It had to be big enough not to go through the ring. And so he got down to 1,700 boxes that year. And he's all to heck with it. Still isn't worth the fuss. And his apples, to this day, are still darn good apples. The Park Service have gone in there and done a little rehab work on it, but a lot of the people that lived up there took care of them.
Yeah, one time they tried fish fertilizer for the orchard. I remember that.
Oh, did they?
Yeah. Bear loved the apples that year.
Oh, I imagine. Well, that's what Harry was saying all along. He says, heck, an apple orchard up here is simple. He says, we're far enough away from all the other orchards. We don't have to worry about worms and stuff like that. He says, in the spring of the year, the damn river floods the orchard. And he says, that takes care of your water. And he says, in the fall of the years, the bear climb the damn limbs and break all the limbs off. He says, that takes care of my pruning. He says, all I have to do is have people out there to pick a few and put them in boxes and ship them down the lake. Mrs. Pills was still there, and she'd raised her 3 children right there at Canoe Creek. The father had died, so she was widowed at that point, and she survived on what little they had put aside after he passed away. Plus she had well, it was pretty much of an independent lifestyle up there. They had their houses all built and paid for. It was on patented land, so they didn't have to worry about that, and taxes were very low. But she had some English walnut trees there. At one time, it was the most northerly English walnut orchard in the U.S. And that was her cash crop. She'd shipped those in the fall of the year and got a pretty good price for them even then. And she'd decide she needed a little fresh meat, so she'd take her little single-shot .22 and go out in the walnut orchard, and pretty soon she'd come back with a squirrel, those gray squirrels. And later, when I was on the pasture boat, I went to work for the boat company in '52, and when I pulled in there, Jack Ashby and I on the boat, we pulled in there one day, and I was out on the bow handing some mail over, passing the mail over. She handed me this paper plate, 2 of them actually taped together, one upside down, the other. She says, "Here's some chicken for you boys." Well, I knew exactly what it was because I'd had fried chicken up there before. And I took it up in the pilot house, and Jack says, "What do you got there?" And I said, "Oh, some fried chicken." She says, "I didn't know she raised chickens up here." And I said, "Oh, yeah." These are great. I took the lid off, and he says, "That don't look like chicken to me. Let's try some." I grabbed one, and I started munching away on it, and it was delicious, it was squirrel. But he finally, I had to fight him for the rest of it. And when he finally took a taste, and he wanted more of it.
Most of the cabin owners along the lake had their own boats, many like these classic Chris crafts. As time passed, the cabin owners found it better to use the airplane and have a fishing boat at the cabin. Back in Chelan, A.K. Platt, the local crop duster, was entertaining the locals by diving into valleys. They breathlessly waited to see if the crop duster would pull out the other side or miss the power lines.
They had to have more help there because they're getting quite a bit of student pilot training, and they had 3 airplanes, 3 J-3 Cubs and what they call it, a super cruiser, something like that, 4-place plane that should probably only kept 3 maybe, but at any rate, that kept the airways going from the crack of dawn in the morning till it got pitch black at night. And Ernie was more or less in charge of the whole thing. Well, that kind of put some awful long hours on him. And he had a cot down in the basement. Between flights, he could slip down there where it was cool and grab a little shut-eye from time to time, but that's kind of a haphazard way of doing it. So the best thing to do, I guess, was to get a line boy to get them out there and doing all the pumping out floats and washing down the sides of the planes when somebody got a little airsick, and that sort of stuff, which I got a lot of practice at. But then there was 100-hour checks that had to be done, and changing oil and this sort of stuff from time to time, and they kind of got me checked out on all that so that they could come back and take a look after I got done, make sure that it was done right. But I'd do the actual physical stuff, pumping out the floats. I'd go over at 4 o'clock in the morning before daylight and get the seaplanes down on the beach and ready for the first students when they'd show up at daylight, and do all the pre-flights, warming up the engine, check the oil and the fuel, and clean the windshields off and all that. Pump the floats again if they had been sitting in the water. Boy, there was a lot of students that were learning how to fly, and then Ernie would quite often like to get the heck away from the place for a little vacation time, so he'd have a student fly with him dual up to Dumpke Lake, and he'd get off the airplane and stay there and fish with Gordon Stewart. And the student then would get a half-an-hour solo taking it back to Chelan, and I'd put the airplane away. The next morning, the first student would get a half-hour solo going up to Dumpke Lake to pick up Ernie, and half-an-hour dual going back down the lake. And that'd give Ernie a chance to get a little fishing time in up there and get away from the rat race down here. And that worked out pretty good for him. I always wanted to learn how to fly, and they gave me plenty of opportunity to practice on the water stuff. I used to taxi the airplanes around on the water all the time and run them up on the step once in a while just for the kicks. And on one occasion, I accidentally got off the water. I never did tell your dad about that. He probably kicked my tail yet today. But I got off the water, and just as soon as I realized that I didn't have that vibration from the water on the floats, I started easing that throttle back and not pulling back on any more stick, and just easing it back until it finally made about 3 good sky hops. And then the propeller speed went to idle, and we idled all the way back to the beach, and I didn't want to take a chance on that getting up there again. shortly thereafter, then Chelan Airways, or Wenatchee Air Service put in Chelan Airways, or however they started that. And Ernie come here as a pilot instructor, and from that point, then we didn't get the Waco until, oh gosh, I was there a couple of years, I guess, when the Waco showed up. And that was a double winger, beautiful interior and the thing. They had a hardwood finish on the dashboard and around the window trim and all that, and roll-up windows in the sides up in the front portion. I don't remember if they had any roll-up windows in the back. I don't think so. And the back seat. And I had some pictures I took of it, and I guess Ernie got to see those before he passed.
Well, that's what the lake was like when Ernie came visiting from Oregon. Of course, Ernie had to visit his buddies Hank and Dick at the Airways. Those who knew Hank could predict what would happen next.
Well, he's up here on vacation, and he came out to the air base there. Dick and I were talking to him, and I suggested we go into Trapper Lake. I said, Ernie, you want to go up, spend the night at Trapper. We had a good camp set up there. So he was all for it, and I think that's all it took to get him sold on getting back here. He was, we had a good trip up, good fishing. About a few days after he went back, Henry called me and wanted to know if that job was still open, because when he was here, I told him, I said the job was still open for him. About a week later, he called and said he was coming back.
Came to Chelan about the same time, 40?
Well, I'm originally from Virginia, born and raised on a dairy farm back there. But I went in, joined the Canadian Air Force in '39. And early 40, I went up there and got my training at Edmonton. And I was out on a flight the day of Pearl Harbor. And came back in and nobody on the flight line. I thought, where in the heck is everyone? I walked in the hangar and they were all in there listening to the radio and listening about Pearl Harbor and so forth. And finally they notified us later that any of us that wanted to transfer back, that we could apply for it, which I did. I applied for it, and ended up. I went down to Victorville, and there was a class taking their finals and their final flights, and they stuck me in that class, and I took the exams with them and the flight tests and got my wings, and ended up flying for Uncle Sam in. The one I liked the best was the 38. I enjoyed it more than any of them.
The P-38?
Yeah.
Somebody around here decided Dad was a bootlegger there for a while, didn't he?
Oh, that was me. Well, Ernie and Dick and myself.
You're all bootleggers.
We're all bootleggers. That was, well, the thing was that the miners they didn't have access to booze up there. And they wanted to put in a liquor store at Lucerne. Well, the liquor board didn't want it. So they came up with the idea of letting us, Ernie, Dick, and myself, and even Bernice and Edith, go in and buy this booze. So what we did, we had courtesy envelopes made up left them up at the mine at the rec hall, and miners would go in and get an envelope and write on it what he wanted and put the money in the envelope. And the bus driver would bring it down to Lucerne, and then we'd pick them up and bring them down and fill the orders. Never charged them nothing. We always put the change back in the envelope, back with it. This prosecuting attorney was going to be running for a judgeship or whatnot, and he was trying to make a name for himself. It was one of the fellows up there at the mine decided that he'd falsify envelopes, write different names on them and whatnot, and get this. And then on weekends and holidays, why, he'd bootleg it, he'd sell it. And the guy was crazy enough to even keep a record of what he was doing. Well, one of the miners got mad and turned him in on it. But then the prosecuting attorney picked it up and picked up the bootlegger who was up there and bus driver and swore out warrants for Ernie and Dick and myself. And he gave him to Montefiore, who was deputy sheriff at that time, told him not to serve them until after 5 o'clock Friday evening. And his purpose was, he thought he was going to lock up our business, is what he thought he'd do. Well, luckily I had some good friends in the Mana especially, and he come out and told me about 3 o'clock, told me about it. And they didn't even have a bond set on it. So I had Dick and Ernie both take an airplane and go to Stehekin. I said, just book and stay up there. They can't get you. So they did, they took off. Well, we finally got it straightened out and got bond set on it and so forth, and I called them, had them come on back. And, well, I had a letter from the liquor board that I was in the liquor store approving us doing it, see, approving of it. So I went in the liquor store to get a copy of that letter, and Don Broughton at the time got scared because the prosecuting attorney had gone in the liquor store and took all the records. See, and it scared Don, and he sent the dadgum letter back to Olympia. Well, then I couldn't get the liquor board to come through because we were doing something illegal on their side, and they didn't want to admit what they were doing. So we had to go to court on it. And we found out that the judge had made some remarks about it, and we might as well come on in there and admit it or something. So we asked for tenure of judges. We got this judge from Omak, who was an Indian, heck of a swell fellow. And when they got on the witness stand, why, this Lucky bootlegger, they started questioning him some and won't know if he knew Ernie or Dick or High Point. I said, well, I guess I've seen him before, but he wasn't admitting anything. See? And he completely changed his tune. He wouldn't, because some of the miners had got to him and told him that he was a dead man if he testified anything against us. So it shut him up, but quick. We had a bowling team up there at one time. We'd go up every Thursday night and bowl.
Really?
Yeah. Go up and bowl, back down, spend the night at Lucerne. Yeah, Christmas parties, we usually, they're big parties where we would make a special trip just to haul the refreshments in for 'em.
Started flying Lake Chelan about 1945. We had several Piper Cubs trainers, and we had a GI school teaching GIs to fly. And then from that, after we got through the GI school, well, then we started getting bigger airplanes and going into tourist business, flying up and down the lake. I guess that when I first started flying in there, Jordan was still in the Army. And Dr. Dewar had a boat over at the fish hatchery. So I'd fly people in, land there, and let them use the boat. Then when Stuart got back from overseas, he went back to the lake, and I kept on doing that. And finally, Stuart got a hold of Dr. Dewar, and I wanted to know what was going on, flying people in there and not using his boat. So Dr. Dewar took the boat, and from then on, we flew in to the lake, and we got to be pretty good friends after that. And he was kind of a tough old nut. He run a trap line all winter long. One winter he got sick. He couldn't figure out the trouble. He just went to bed and stayed there. Next spring he came out and had a physical. Found out his appendix had burst, and he sat there all winter absorbing all that poison. He still lived. Yeah, Gordon would come out in the winter time for a couple of weeks. He'd come down. He had a trap line. He'd sell all his furs, and then he'd open up office at one of the pubs downtown, and everybody he knew would come around and talk to him and get drunk. He watched TV, and when he got his belly full of that, he'd go back home. About 1954, Don McKenzie bought into the Airways and became my partner. And in 1955, we bought two 180 aircraft on floats. And then we started using those to go into Domke and into Trapper Lake, Lucerne. That time the mine was running, so we were making 4, 5, 6 trips a day. And Don would fly the freight. He had a private license. He'd fly freight and help me out with maintenance work. His wife helped out, did the office work, and he turned out to be one of the best pilots that I've ever flown with. He only had a private license, but he flew better than most commercial pilots, so he was an asset there. We used to take an airplane and go to Canada, go fishing once in a while. He'd do all the flying there. And we kept on doing that until the mine closed about 4 years later, and then his business dropped off to where Don couldn't make his way going, so he sold it out, his half, to me. We started going to Trapper in the 1950s. We started out with a Ronca sedan. We could take 2 people in and take out one at a time. That was about it. Then we got the 180s, and we could take in 2 and then take out and all their baggage, and then we could take out 2 and the baggage too. So it was a much easier job.
It was kind of tricky flying into Trapper and getting out of it, wasn't it?
No, it was one of the easiest lakes we had. The wind was always coming off the glacier down lake, and there was never any rough air in there, and no rough currents. And we had enough room to start down to Lower Lake and get off and make a turn inside and come out. And all the years I flew in there, why, there never was any stormy weather. It made it hard.
That's kind of like being down in a crater almost.
Yeah, you're protected all the way around. The only problem we ever had was getting fishermen in there and then have the lake fog in. We couldn't have it rain.
You were able to fly a trapper for a long time, then what happened?
The Park Service came in and put it in the wilderness area, so we had to stop.
Did they tell you at one time that they were going to keep...
Yeah, the guy that was doing all the talks said that that'd be a grandfather clause and we could still fly in there. That was all okay, except when the papers were finally signed, why it wasn't that way at all.
What did he tell you when you...
Said it was as long as we were flying in there, why we could keep on doing it.
What was his... wasn't his name Butterfield?
Yeah,
Yeah.
he was a lying son of a gun.
How did he tell you that you couldn't do it anymore?
Oh, he didn't. He just left the country. He let someone else tell me. I would guess it was years ago when I was flying with Hank Harvey and had Dick Kidd flying, and we were dropping supplies to a mine in Horseshoe Basin. And on one trip we had a gas bottle hooked with a parachute. We threw it out over the mine site and the parachute hooked onto the water rudder, and it was dragging the tail down and nose up. So Dick had a big knife. He crawled out of the airplane back on the float, hung onto a strut and cut the thing loose. I don't know whether they ever found the gas or not, but at least we got rid of it.
Dropping all their supplies for them, or groceries, and even the settling tanks. And the only thing that we lost was in all the drops was an acetylene tank. And the only thing we could figure was that it hit a soft spot in a glacier and went right into it.
I took Don McKenzie and my brother into Square Lake back in the mountains. And, I tried to get off with them. I couldn't do it because the wind had shifted. So I dropped them off, and I was going to fly around and burn off some gas. I got off the water. I clipped the top off of a tree, so I just kept on going and went back to Chelan, and the mechanic looked at it and he just put a patch over it. Next morning I went back in and the weather was better, so I could fly them both out there. I went to New Year's party one time. That was enough for me. But, they all had open house. They'd keep the doors open, and they'd have a couple of bottles of whiskey, or mixers on the table. People just go in and drink a while, and then you go to the next door neighbor, and you just make the whole round of Honeymoon Heights, and drank until they couldn't drink anymore, and they all fell down and went to sleep, I guess. Oh, the last few years it got busy, but with the Park Service, it wasn't fun anymore. Steaking used to be fun, and well, you know, when you and your dad and brother were there, things were pretty laid back. You knew everybody. But it got too businesslike after a while. cutthroat. Park Service had too many regulations, so it wasn't near the place it was.
People used to get together a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, everybody knew everybody else and helped out. But after the park came in, why, they all started fighting each other.
And then in the wintertime and the fall and stuff, everybody got together so he can have New Year's parties.
Yeah, we used to go up for the old Golden West Lodge, have a New Year's party and Thanksgiving dinners.
I remember that picture in National Geographic where you had to get the snow off the wings up there.
Yeah, that was one of the days that the last snowfall of the year, I got stuck up there and it was snowing so hard I couldn't leave the airplane at the dock, so I had to take it around in front of Guy Armis's place and tie it up there. Once an hour I have to go out and shovel it off. When I got through, it snowed 3 feet that night. Just then it never snowed another drop until next year. That was the last of it. Daisy never flew, but I used to do errands for her. She wanted something downtown, I'd buy it. Then I'd go over and deliver it, and she'd give me a cake or something like that, you know. She was a real friendly girl.
Ernie the Pilot, many landings were made. Lives were better, some even saved. A child awaiting, the plane to come soon. Ice cream for a cake, birthday at noon. A message from Down Lake to those who reside, imparted by Ernie, standing at their side. Seats on the dock an ambulance would make, a patient to the doctor Ernie would take. Piper, Waco, Cessna, Beaver, different all, yet on the lake a comforting sound each would make. In their own way, people will cheer, thank you God, for the Ernie sent here.